Hi there, I'm Matthew Lester from the Rhodes Business School. We are coming up on the State of the Nation Address 2016, and we are wondering what the President is going to say about one of the most burning issues in South Africa today. Fees must fall. This is a little lecture to help understand the issue. Please, these are my views and not necessarily the views of any member of the Rhodes University staff, the public, or the Davis Tax Committee on which I work. So let's recap. Last year, the fee increases for 2016 were waived, and that was a magnificent victory for the Fees Must Fall campaign. Now the President has appointed a commission of inquiry to look into higher education. This is going to take all of 2016, and the students have been asked to wait for the outcome of the report. That does not help a student who can't pay today. Now, the critics of the Fees Must Fall campaign say, what are you talking about? Nearly everywhere in the world, one has to pay for tertiary education. So they say, try paying for education in England, where it costs $9,000 a year. That's about 150,000 Rand a year. And in South Africa, you might be paying 60,000 Rands a year. That's about $4,000, about the same as New Zealand. The answer is that what is paid overseas is actually irrelevant. We need to look at the pressing issues in South Africa. And if we look at the Gini coefficient, which measures the disparity between rich and poor, we find that South Africa is one of the most unequal nations in the world. If, as most people agree, education is the universal panacea to addressing inequality, we have to do more about it than other countries do. Thus, I don't believe that looking at what we pay overseas is of relevance in the South African debate. Never forget that inequality is best addressed by a free education for all, and so South Africa has recognized that, and currently 19% of our national budget, or 281 billion Rand a year, is spent on education. That's a massive amount. To increase the budget to provide free university education for all would cost another 30 billion Rand. So one would think, well, that's just another 10%. Well, not quite. It's not that simple. Let's have a look at South Africa's national budget and see where university education is actually sitting today. We get about 1.25 trillion Rand a year in tax collections. To that we add another 200 billion Rand in borrowings. That gives a total national budget of about 1.45 trillion Rand a year. Now let's go out and spend it. Now when you go to the national budget, you see great big tables like this, which are very difficult to understand and don't tell the picture properly. So let's paint the picture and show you what happens. So we start off spending 216 billion Rand a year on basic education. That is the vast majority of the education budget. Then we have to look after everybody's health, and there's great pressure to do more on that by bringing in national health insurance. Then we go with economic affairs and others, local development, general public services, social protection, very important, providing grants, etc. And now we are facing an ever-increasing debt service cost due to the level of South Africa's debt that we've accumulated over the past few years. This leaves a tiny slice of the pie for education post-school. Now, post-school education is not only university education, but there's only 4% of the total national budget allocated to this cause. So let's isolate that red bit of the pie and break it down and see where that 65 billion Rand actually goes. Again, there's a big table on this that doesn't tell the picture properly, so again, let's draw a little pie of it. And we say, starting off, we spend about 9 billion Rand a year on vocational and continuing training. That's for people who've already graduated, who still have to be trained further while they are working. Then there are the skills development contributions spent by business and by the SETAs. That's another 16 billion Rand. Some of it is siphoned off into the education budget. Then comes the National Student Financial Aid Scheme of 11 billion rand, and then the university subsidies of 24 billion rand. Finally, there's about 3 to 4 billion rand spent on upgrading university infrastructure and building new universities for the future. But the important issue is to see how the enormous budget that goes to education is whittled down, and we land up with about 35 billion rand actually being spent on university fees, either by way of subsidies or by way of direct national student financial aid interventions. So some would argue that the direct student subsidies are already 11 billion rand a year, and that's almost half of the general subsidies paid to universities. We're already putting a lot of money to it. And some would say that, is this not enough? Well, actually, no, it's not. So we have to go and look for other ways of dealing with it. And then the questions start. Why don't we just increase state borrowings or increase tax rates to pay for fees must fall for everybody? This brings in the thorny debate of horizontal equity for all. And what we have to look at and say is, who gets the money? It's not only a question of rich versus poor, it is the equal distribution of what is available amongst the poor. So, if we take this graph by National Treasury, we can see that we are spending more on education than anything else. But that's on a per capita basis. And as the population is growing, obviously the expenditure on education is growing. But we must not lose sight that we still have to give social protection. That's the grant system. We still have to keep everybody healthy. We still have to keep everybody safe. And then we have the problem of the increasing national debt burden, which is detracting from delivery on all fronts. So what we're saying is that the students have already got a lot. Can we now give further funding to students at the expense of others who are also struggling in South Africa today? And that's an enormous debate. We also must not lose sight that the population is growing rather quickly. We have the National Development Plan, yes, but that said there would only be 60 million South Africans by 2030. Latest estimates are that there will be nearly 65 million people, and they've all got to have something. Then we look at all the government interventions that are planned. They are shown in red there. That would be the cost of implementing all the dreams of Luthuli House. And in grey shows the revenue stream, which shows that we can't actually afford all the interventions that are planned. So we then turn to the tax system. Now, these figures are a year old. They will be updated on the 24th of February when the next national budget is put to Parliament by Prof Matthew. But it shows that South Africa has 3 major taxes on which basically the whole budget is based. And we go like this. We say last year we increased taxation on individuals by 43 billion rand. That was more than 10% to keep the ship steady. We also, through inflation, take a VAT increase every year as prices go up, even though the VAT rate stays the same. And companies who are ailing at the moment are expected to pay another 15 billion. We'll have to see how that comes along. But what we've got to say is that these taxes are already increasing, and there is a limit to which they can be pushed. So to ask for another 25 billion or so for free fees must fall is beyond the call that you can put to the taxpayer. So let's increase public debt. Why don't we just borrow another 25 billion a year? We're already borrowing 200 billion rand a year. What about another 25? Well, if we look at our national debt, it is already in a very worrying position. National debt increased substantially from 2009 going forward because of the world financial crisis. They hoped that this would level off, and it didn't. And by 2015, they had to take direct fiscal interventions and increase taxes just to steady the South African national debt profile. If they didn't, South Africa's status in the world economic community would be reduced to junk, and that would bring enormous hardship on all South Africans. So what they're doing at the moment is they are increasing debt by the absolute maximum that they can every year, and they're treading a fine line on that. So we can't just borrow another 25 billion rand to pay for students. Now let's get to the wisdom of one Thomas Piketty. Thomas Piketty and his book, Capital in the 21st Century, has caused an international sensation. It's actually more about inequality than it is about economics. And Piketty is talking about the differences between rich and poor and how they are escalating throughout the world. One of the studies conducted by Piketty is to look at college attendance in the USA. Now, in the USA, they call universities colleges mainly, and parents have to pay for student fees. In fact, in America, it is a tradition for all families to save for their college fund. But this doesn't work, says Piketty, because what we get is that when we look at the different ranking of parent income, we see that in the lowest income levels, first 10%, we see that less than 40% of their children attend university due to financial hardship. But when one goes to the top decile, where people are earning the most, what we get is that nearly all their children attend college. So the rich children get educated and make money, the poor don't, and they don't get much better. Piketty has a lot to say about this. But what is important is that at the top decile, where people can afford it, they are paying, and we should protect that income stream. What Piketty is essentially saying is, your intervention must be targeted. One must give direct, immediate financial intervention to the lower income deciles. Then you look at giving some intervention in the middle, and the rich must pay their own way, otherwise you are effectively giving them a tax reduction. This was confirmed by a study by Janssen and Karlitz of the University of Stellenbosch on behalf of the Davis Tax Committee in South Africa last year. They looked at the issue of VAT zero rating. Now, we all identify with the fact that certain basic foodstuffs are exempt from VAT, and we do that prima facie to help the poor. But what we are finding is that the rich enjoy the benefit of zero rating on basic foodstuffs just as much as the poor. And thus a general intervention where we give something free to everybody is not the most efficient way to go. What we need to be doing is targeting the poor and seeing what we can do for them by way of a direct intervention. What we should be saying to the rich is, sorry, you pay. So here are my recommendations. There is absolutely no doubt that more needs to be done about student fees. A lot more. But disrupting university studies is disrupting the very mechanism that we have for addressing inequality. What we need to have is carefully developed targeted interventions to help poorer students that can make a huge difference. But the rich must pay. Those who can afford to go to university pay. Otherwise, a large component, about 50% of university income, will not get paid and will have to be paid by the taxpayer who is already struggling. We can't just give free education to the rich. That's just giving a tax break. The Fees Must Fall campaign must carry on. We need to keep the student fees issue high on the agenda. But there are other ways of helping the debate other than disrupting universities. Students and universities need to develop representations to the Commissioner of Inquiry. I know that's frustrating, but what we need to demonstrate is that students and universities are united in their representations, that their representations are targeted at helping the poor, and that representations are sustainable and affordable for South Africa. I'm Matthew Lester at the Rhodes Business School. Thank you for your attention.